When's the last time you had a conversation about money that wasn't triggered by something bad happening? One of the harsh truths, aside from just handing down money to future generations, you're handing down the mindset around money as well.
How can we recognize the money mindset that we've inherited? And how do we stop it so that we break the generational cycle?
Money doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah.
What were they really trying to teach is respect money. It's a finite resource. Be smart with it. Be clever with it.
Real estate is being safe that. Is that still true? And is that still relevant?
It is the £1 million question. It's very easy nowadays to say, I need to buy property and I need to do rent to rent, or I need to invest in the S&P 500.
What about crypto? What coin am I buying?
What do you want to achieve by investing? What is the purpose for you? And that all comes down to understanding what your values are.
60% of Gen Zs and millennials are living paycheck. 40% of households are one paycheck away from homelessness. That is insane. Is financial freedom a reality for the average Joe, or is it actually just a pipe? Hi everyone, I am so excited to welcome Vig, a seasoned money coach, to the podcast. Vig empowers people to really change how they think about money and develop healthier, more resilient approaches to their financial well-being. In today's episode, we are uncovering societal and cultural influences that make money such a sensitive and taboo topic. We're sharing insights into the myths that hold us back, unlearning harmful financial habits, and finding out how each of us can achieve realistic financial freedom. So if money's ever left you feeling stuck or stressed, this is the episode for you. We're cutting through the noise with this raw, honest chat to challenge what we've been taught about money. This conversation has fundamentally changed how I think about money, and I'm so excited for you. Join us as we rewrite money rules and help you take control of your finances. Enjoy this episode. Vig, welcome to Fearless Fireside Chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. Right, let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. Money. Money is often seen as such a taboo and sensitive topic. Why do you think that is? Because regardless of what culture you come from or what your background is, it's always a very uncomfortable topic to broach. Where do you think it comes from? Where does it stem from? What's your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think money, more so than many other areas in life, is quite an emotive topic. There's so many emotions and wide-ranging emotions that are tied to money. Could be shame, fear of judgment, anxiety, stress, greed, jealousy. It all rolls into it. And until, I would like to say, relatively recently, most people have been struggling to talk about anything emotive, right? So it's no surprise that people avoid talking about money to a point where you get into an emotional conversation. So I think whatever culture you're from, that's probably where it's rooted. But for like an immigrant culture, the Tamil Sri Lankan diaspora, for example, even more emotive. Thinking about the brief history that we've had recently, a lot of displacement, families torn apart, families moving abroad, struggling with money, having to fund family that are still back home. It's not an easy topic to talk about. And we're all brought up with certain life lessons, if you like, tripes around money and how to manage it that may not be working for us anymore.
Two things on that. One, the list of emotions cannot agree with you anymore. There's so many emotions that arise just from the topic of money, but most of them are very negative. Fear, anxiety, greed. Maybe that's society, maybe that's culture, maybe that's our way of thinking or what we've been brought up to kind of understand or learn about money. Where can we even begin to start to change that narrative around those emotions that we have around money?
Well, let me ask you this. When's the last time you had a conversation about money that wasn't triggered by something bad happening?
Every month when I have to do my finances.
Yeah, exactly, right. So the only time people generally have a conversation about money is when things aren't going right.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you have a conversation and say, right, what should we spend our money on this year? It doesn't happen.
That's a very rare occasion.
Exactly. You win the lottery. That's a good conversation about money. But typically the experience for most people, the lived experience, is that you only talk about money when things aren't going to plan. Yeah. So it's not really surprising that any conversation around money brings up all these ill feelings, stress and anxiety about money, because it's not a good experience that you're bringing up. So really the the place to start is to reframe how you see money. And it sounds a bit hokey, but it's reflection. Like reflection on why do you feel this way about money? And the emotion you might feel about money might be different to what I might feel about money. I might feel shameful. You might feel just stressed in a different context. But it's really to understand why it is that you feel like that. Trying to think back to your earlier experiences of money, even as a child. How did you see people around you react when it came to money? Because one of the harsh truths, especially as you become a parent, is aside from just handing down money to future generations, you're handing down the mindset around money as well. And they adopt that at a very early age. So if you're always seen to be quite stressed and anxious about money, when the cashier's checking out the till, or you get your credit card statement through, or whatever else it might be, how you react to that is something that kids really absorb, and they'll internalize it going forward.
You touched on this already around like money being quite a loaded subject, right? Because it can bring out all sorts of feelings like shame, and a lot of people kind of tie a lot of self-worth as well to their financial situation or their bank balance. And I know we shouldn't, but we all do. You either, there's this perception of money where you either have too much of it or you don't have enough of it. And there's never like a happy medium per se, just for your average Joe. I'm not talking about the multi-billionaires and billionaires in the world. But when you talk about like kind of money mindset and digging into that kind of generational kind of perception of money and how that's handed over, how can we even begin to recognize the money mindset that we've inherited, and how do we stop it and form new habits so that we kind of almost break the generational cycles of how we think or perceive money, the perception of money?
As I say, I think reflection is the foundation to all of that. It takes some time to sit down with yourself and think about what money lessons did I grow up with.
Give me some examples.
So, for example, I'm one that I'm sure you've heard, money doesn't grow on trees, right? We've all heard that. What were they really trying to teach us? Maybe they didn't even intentionally identify why they were even repeating it themselves. Maybe our grandparents said it. But I believe that one is rooted in helping us to develop a respect for money, in that it's not endless. It's a finite resource. Don't spend it all at once. Be smart with it. Be clever with it. And if you think of it from that perspective, it makes total sense, right? And that should be applicable throughout your whole life. But I think inadvertently, what it's probably done is developed a scarcity mindset in a lot of the younger generation. And that could work both ways. Scarcity in the sense that you appreciate that money is hard to come by. So in that sense, you're inclined to hoard it. Don't spend it. You're going to be working harder and harder and harder to try and hoard it and hoard it and hoard it. You're 40s, 50s, you're all of a sudden a workaholic. You've got loads of money, but no life, right? No time for your family, because you just have to keep working because this tree might, this money flow might stop. So I need to keep going. On the flip side, you've got people who have a scarcity mindset where they think that if they've got money today, they don't know when they might get it again. So they should probably make the most of it and spend it now. These will be your splurge spenders, right? Save up a little bit and then you go splurge it right back into debt perhaps, right? But it's okay because I've made the most of the money that I had. Now I'll just have to wait for the money to come back at some point and then I can rinse and repeat. But I think it depends on each individual's personality as to how they internalize the lessons they've been taught. But money doesn't grow on trees, as an example. Another one for you might be that all debt is bad. I've typically experienced this with older generations. And it may well have been true for them when they were going through the age where they were in the accumulation phase, in that interest rates may have been a lot higher. So debt repayments would have been a lot higher. Things also weren't as relatively expensive as they are now. So you wouldn't have to get into debt ordinarily through the ordinary course of business. You'd be paying for things with cash. Debt wasn't as widely used. And at that time, all debt is bad may have been a reasonable, but is it still serving you? It may not be. There's things that you can spend money on that where debt is good. Education, appreciating assets, investments, things like that. Some investing you can go into debt to actually buy them, like a property. And that might be fine. It's not the end of the world. But obviously, buying things that are depreciating assets or just, splurging on holidays and consumerism may not be the best thing to do. But debt at the end of the day is a good tool to have to grow your wealth.
Okay, on that, I have so many questions.
Go ahead.
So on, obviously, debt has its natural kind of, it's bad, you know, no one should be kind of in like living a life in debt. And I'm not just talking about like overdrafts and things like that. I'm talking about car leasing, for example, or your mortgage is your biggest debt that anyone could arguably have, right? What's your point of view on, controversial, owning a property versus renting a property? Because again, there's a taboo there, right? Around this notion of, oh, if you're renting, you don't have any wealth. But equally, you could be spending the money that you would be putting aside to own a property into, I don't know, whatever investment vehicles that you have. Yeah. What's your point of view on that? And what debt is good to have versus what debt is bad?
So, yeah, owning, renting, this one rears its head. It's almost like a cyclical thing. My opinion is there's no right answer for everybody. Okay. There's a right answer for you. And it really depends on what it is you want to achieve. What are you looking for? If you're looking for a family home to lay down roots near family, near the school, and all that sort of thing, you're planning to be there 5+ years, it probably makes sense to buy a house, right? To give you that sense of stability. If that's not part of your thing and you're more transient, maybe you're only looking to live there for a few years, then renting might be part of your thing. But it really comes down to, well, what are you looking for? Are you looking to show that you have wealth? Is that your final decision point on whether you buy or rent, or is it to have a roof over your head? So it really comes down to what it is you're trying to get to. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. For owning a home, most people forget that there's so many hidden costs associated with it. It's not just the purchase price of the house. There's all the ongoing maintenance, which as a renter you wouldn't have. And to your point, that also means then the renter, in theory, should have a lot more cash flow that they can divert into other investments, which may better suit the lifestyle that they're trying to build versus putting it into a house.
So if I have a family and near a school, they're going to go to school for the next kind of 12, 15 years, 18 years, hopefully, we'll see. And I have always kind of been brought up with this goal of owning a house. And that's kind of the goal, right? You work, you earn, you save up, and you buy your first house and you get on the property ladder. Are we saying now that actually, given the current financial kind of market, the way that kind of everything is rocketed in prices, that actually might not be the most sensible thing to do?
I think if we're talking about your family home, I would be less inclined to look at how prices are relatively valued compared to how they were in the past and how they might be in the future.
Why?
Because it's not an investment. This is your family home that you're looking to purchase, probably for quite a medium to long-term time frame. There's no guarantee that anything will increase in value, but the general likelihood is that it probably will. On the other hand, if you're looking at something from an investment perspective, then the relative price matters because your ultimate goal is to make money off this asset, not live in it and build a home and build a family life through it. Home ownership, absolutely. I mean, we're conditioned to believe that this is the target, right? This is what you need to aim for. I have a whole thought process on the conditioning from a young age of which this plays a part. But you need to, again, consider back to, is this belief working in your best interests or is it not? And I know a lot of families that rent, they have no intention of buying and they're leading perfectly happy lives. And they're quite well off, right? It's not necessary to own a home to be considered wealthy if that's your goal.
And I think it's breaking that perception though, isn't it?
It is.
Comes down to choices, really. If I'm reading this correctly.
Yes.
It's down to what your personal goals are and actually what your own perception and what you want out of life really comes down to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And on that, if this wasn't my family home and if this is an investment and I'm looking at kind of, historically real estate has been safe bet, we've all heard the brick and mortar is the best kind of investment base because it will always yield you money. Is that still true and is that still relevant?
It is the £1 million question. And I'm going to be annoying and say there's no straightforward answer to this. Not that I'm a property investment expert by any means, but as a money coach, what I would suggest my clients do and help them to do is to assess a possible property investment against all other available options to invest that money.
Give me examples.
So you could be, I mean, even across property investments, right? There's different types of property, different locations, different price points. Some of them attract tax incentives, others don't. So even within property, there's a lot of different options for how you can employ that money. Then you could look at investing in the stock market. There's tax advantages to doing so because the government will allow you to have a tax-free allowance in an ISA, in a pension, these accounts that you can use where you can invest and get your returns tax-free, which you can't do with property. So there's incentives to do it that way. And the stock market as well provides returns. Again, just like property, depending on what part of the stock market and how you invest in it, you might get a slightly different return to another part. But what I would always work through with my clients is to make them aware of the options in front of them and to be able to critically assess between them, because it's very easy nowadays with the free flood of information on social media to say, I need to buy property and I need to do rent to rent or something, all these new concepts, relatively new concepts are coming in, or conversely to say, I need to invest in the S&P 500. But there's way more options than that available to you out there. Education is key, awareness is key. But the first awareness you have to have is, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want to do what do you want to achieve by investing? What is the purpose for you? And that all comes down to understanding what your values are. One of the things that I work with clients a lot on is value-based spending. And that's identifying what is important to you and aligning your whole plan, your whole financial plan to that. And if you can do that, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to care if the next guy's driving a Lamborghini or has a property portfolio of 10 properties and you don't, because your values may be differently aligned to theirs. So you won't be comparing yourself with other people anymore. You can be comparing yourself with what you want to achieve in your life. And you'll be using your money and employing your money in a way to get you to build that life for you.
What are some of the examples that you've seen from clients around what their values are and how they then align it? Like, give me an example.
So I have a client that I've worked with. I typically work with couples with young families. So for the most of them, a shared goal is that they just want to have more quality family time. But that might be different to one family compared to the other. I have some clients, for them, it's a big holiday every year. And, the budget that they have for these holidays may make some people's eyes water, but it's what they find valuable. But what we work on is, if that's what you value, fantastic. Try and spend more on it. But then look at all these other things you're spending money on. And you've just told me that these don't matter to you. So why are we spending money on these? Some of them you can't get out, and no one wants to spend money on their mortgage, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to spend money on fuel.
Please tell me how we stop doing that.
No one wants to spend money on these things, but you have to. So some of them you can't get out of, but at least you can try and find the best deal. Try and reduce how much money you spend on them so that you have more money to spend on the things you love, like going on the big family holiday. For others, a good client of mine, it's cars, right? A shared passion with me. They just like all things cars, car events, car trips, buying car parts, etc. So if that's your passion, let's not shy away from it. If that's your passion, that's what makes you happy. That's what money's for. Let's find a way to spend more money on it. Let's reduce spending money on other things which you don't really care so much about, like eating out, for example. They weren't particularly fussed about that. They were just kind of doing it because it was easy. But when I asked them, they weren't into Michelin restaurants or anything like that. It was just convenience. So we talked through how would you budget that into a grocery and how could you make it something more interesting, the way you prep your food becomes cheaper. Now you've got more money. Do you want to spend it on cars or do you want to put it towards investments? And typically clients come to me because they want to build a future for themselves. So we find that balance between spending on what you want, your passion, like cars or holidays, and also redirecting any savings we can get towards building a future, which would typically go through investing to then over time grow that pot so they can then build the life that they want to have.
I love that, because there's a lot of things, and I'm definitely guilty of, like, I call them leaky taps, because they're like, I'm just leaking money in places that I don't actually need and doesn't actually serve me, but it's holding me back from the big picture item. And I know, like, there's a lot of like controversial things like, oh, if you want to buy a coffee, buy a coffee. That's not going to save you. That's not going to get you to your investment goal or whatever. Yeah. But I'm also like, pennies make pounds and pounds make hundreds and so forth, right? So where does the buck stop? Because we also want to live, right?
Yeah.
But we also want to make sure that there's a sustainable future for us as well, because there's so many crazy stats out there. I think it was Deloitte that recently published a survey that was 60% of Gen Zs and millennials are living paycheck to paycheck. And Lending Club and Payment Survey just came out in the summer and said 49% of high income earners, and these are guys that are earning 100K plus are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
But what shocked me the most was a UK survey done by Shelter and YouGov that found 40% of households are one paycheck away from homelessness. That is insane.
Scary facts, right?
It's so scary because we are living in the UK.
Yeah.
This is like, the land of opportunity. And for nearly half of the population to be one paycheck away from homelessness, to me, that's like, I can't comprehend that. Like, how do we stop living paycheck to paycheck? And how do we make sure that we have a sustainable future of not just financial independence, but financial well-being, and it's healthy, sustainable, and it's realistic?
Yeah. It's the facts around this are shocking, but it's also not that surprising when you think of, and this goes back to my earlier point that I said about conditioning from an early age, right? And it's not specific to our community, it's just the global economy. My own personal view is that the global economy needs workers, right? The whole education system is to produce workers to drive the economy, which makes sense. And you can't really argue that, because if there was no economy, we'd all be in trouble. So you need workers. But from a very early age, we're conditioned to believe that, you have to work hard at school so you can get good grades, so that you can get to a good uni. And then you work really hard at uni so you can get a good job. So you can get a good job, and then you work really hard at your good job so you can get loads of money, and then you can buy a big house, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and then you're still working, because now you've got this lifestyle you've got to fund that you can't get out of. And like, to your point, you could be earning a wedge, right?
Yeah.
But you're still living paycheck to paycheck, because all the money you come in every month is going back out on all the different expenses. And for the vast majority of people, they don't know any different. They haven't thought about it in any other way. So they're comfortable, they're content. They may feel that they've got everything they want out of life, and they just keep working. And that's fine. Absolutely fine. That's what we're conditioned to do. But there's a growing minority, I think, who are starting to question that status quo, myself included. And I think probably you as well, where you think there's got to be more to life than this.
100%.
Right? And
Why are we all on this hamster wheel?
Absolutely.
And it's just not stopping. It's just one job and one career and one promotion after another. And it's like, where does it stop?
Exactly. You start thinking there's got to be more to this. My work doesn't define me. I don't hold my self-worth and my value on my job or my income. There's got to be more to this. And I think the ultimate truth is that if you want to do something, if you want different results, you've got to do something different. And I think that's the kind of phase we're getting into now, where there's a bit more awareness, probably through social media, to be fair, where people are realizing that actually there are other things you could be doing. There's this whole financial freedom, financial independence, retiring early. What's that?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. But these aren't new concepts. People have been doing it for centuries. It's just now more publicly available to see. So, it comes down to awareness. As I said a few times, it's understanding what do you want to achieve, and then building the education and the awareness around that to try and lift yourself out of it. And money being a taboo subject doesn't help people in this respect. I think one of the first most critical things you can do yourself is to accept that, or have the humility that you don't know everything. And as with all walks of life and all areas of life, if you want to get better, one of the easiest things you can do, start talking about it. Have a conversation. You don't have to go into specifics like how much do you earn? How much are you spending on this? It doesn't have to be related to that. It could just be more generalistic, vague conversations. One of the favorite hot topics of cab drivers right now, cost of living crisis, right? An easy in to talk about with anybody. It's just passing the breeze. But you start talking about money, being a bit more aware about money. And as you do that, ideas will flow into you. And then it's a case of filtering them out. What's going to work best for you? What might align with what you're thinking about? And then it's a try it and see sort of thing. And evolving your money plan.
Yeah, I like that. Like softly opening up the conversation around money rather than going in head first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I don't think people are going to like you walking up to them in the street and saying, hey, so how much do you earn?
I mean, yeah, I think we're fearless guys, but we're not reckless. Just on that, like, especially retirement, I think that's such a important conversation to have, and one that we don't have nearly as often as we should, because we all have this notion of, I want to retire by 30, 40, 50, whatever your number is, right? But we very rarely have a plan. We don't have really a plan in place that will enable us to retire at that age, or even for the generation above us. especially immigrant families, they've come here, they've grafted their whole lives, and that's all they've ever known. All they've ever known is the hustle and the grind and the work rate that they have to do. But very rarely have they also planned for their retirement. And now they're at the age of retirement. They're like, oh, great. What do we do now? What's your advice for the me's of the world, right? Where I'm in my mid-30s. I'd like to retire in the next 10, 15, 20 years if I'm lucky. What do I need to do right now to make sure that is actually something that's a reality for me?
So I like analogies. So I'm going to pull one out of the bag for this one. So what I would say to you is, if you wanted to go on a journey and you pull out your Google Maps, you've just identified where you want to go, which is potentially retire early. But what's the other piece of information that you really need to be able to figure out how to get there? And the answer is, well, where are you right now? For most people, they have no idea where they are right now. They don't even know how much money is going out of their account each month. So the most crucial first step is to map out what your current finances are doing right now. And it sounds a little bit mundane, but the visibility you get over your finances is unparalleled by doing this. So just spending a bit of time, have a looking, for example, at the last month of your finances. What money did you have coming in? What money did you have going out? Relative timings. And then having a look at the balances. How much do you have on debt? How much do you have on assets, including your properties, things like that? Pulling all of that together to give you a really holistic picture of what are your finances doing right now is one of the most important things you can do. And for anybody listening, I do have a free resource that you can download off my website, which I'm sure we can put in the show notes, that people can download, and it'll give you directions on how to do that. But once you have that, then you know, okay, this is where I am. You can be a bit more detailed on where do we want to go. So what is early retirement? How much money do you think you might need to retire early? A lot of that decision process is going to come down to how much does your life cost you right now. So in very simple terms, I'm just going to put some arbitrary numbers around it. But if your life costs you £2,000 a month in terms of expenses right now, that's 2,000 times 12, 24,000 a year. So your life has cost you 24,000 a year. Assuming nothing's going to change in 10 years' time, your life is going to cost you 24,000 a year, and you'll need that amount every year until you can access a pension. State pension if you're paying into it for your workplace, or private pension if you're paying into that. So somewhere around 57 to 65, you'll get the next chunk of money from your pension. So there may be anything between 10 and 15 years where you need to fund 24,000 a year. Now you know how much you need. Now you can bridge the gap between, well, what do I have right now? What do I need to have by the time I retire to fund 24K a year? Now you've got two numbers. How do I get there? Typically speaking, savings aren't going to make it, because savings, although they grow, don't grow fast enough to support retirement and big investment goals, which is why all our pensions are invested. They're not in a savings account somewhere. So then it comes down to investing. So now you know how much you need. Now you know what kind of thing you need to do with it. So then it's a case of educating yourself on what kind of investments do you want to put it into. Because this is pre-retirement, because we're talking about early retirement, you don't want to put it into a pension because you can't access that until you retire. You need it beforehand. So you're probably looking at something like an ISA, which is the individual savings account, which the government allow us, by their good grace, to be able to invest £20,000 a year, and anything you put into that account each year grows tax-free. That's probably the most efficient way to invest for a pre-pension retirement age sort of pot. And then it's a case of figuring out, how do I maximize that 20K every year? You don't have to do it lump sum. Split it by 12 and put in an equal amount each month if you can. But the more you start doing that, then you start getting towards putting this plan in action. And then it's a case of checking in every month or two, see how your investments are doing, and adjusting as you need. But at a high level, figure out where you are right now, figure out where you want to go, and then figure out how to get there.
Love that. Practical steps. What about, I mean, you mentioned ISAs as an investment vehicle. What about crypto? Should I be throwing my money into crypto, and what coin am I buying?
Right. So I love this topic. Not. So I won't open that can of worms over there, which questions whether crypto is an investment or not. I think what we can all agree on is crypto has a probability to go up. It also has a probability to go down, just like any investment or gamble, right? I also live by the motto of you got to be in it to win it. So I'm not going to sit here and say no one should get into crypto. If you want to have a chance at it, you've got to buy the lottery ticket, right? But crypto as an asset class, which is what the name you'd give to things you could invest in, property being an asset class, fine wine being an asset class, stamps being an asset class, etc. Yes, watches, commodities, things like that. Crypto is considered an asset class. All of these asset classes have different profiles in sense of how volatile they can be. And what we mean by volatile is how easily or how frequently they might go up or down and how quickly they might go up or down. Some asset classes are more stable, so they go up and down very slowly, like the ebb and flow of a wave, if you like. Others could be very volatile, and from half an hour to half an hour, they could be shooting up and down. Crypto is on the more volatile side of things. No one can really predict which way it's going to go or how quickly, how whatever. The thing with volatile asset classes is the general rule of thumb is you don't want to put too much relative to how much you have. You don't want to put too much of it in a volatile asset class. Because when it comes time for you to actually take that money out because you might need it to retire or to buy a home or whatever, you don't want that investment to be lower than when you bought it because it's so volatile and you can't predict it. What if it's lower now than when you put it in and you need the money and now you're taking it out and it's worth less than when you put it in? That's not great. That's not what we're trying to achieve. So with a volatile asset class, I would say still put some money in it. Just be controlled as to how much you put in it because it's at risk. Everything you invest in, whatever asset class, is always at risk. But you got to be in it to win it. And by the very nature that it's volatile and could, 10x, 100x, you also don't need to put that much in it. Like a smaller amount could actually still get you the results that you want. It's literally a lottery ticket, right?
Yeah.
£1.50 line could make you a millionaire. You don't need to put 10 grand a month into it to still get that same million. So that's the kind of logic I would put to crypto. If anyone's thinking of it, it probably should form part of most people's portfolios, but not to a huge portion.
I feel like with crypto, because of the nature of like how volatile it is, it's one of those things where if you're going to invest in it, be willing to lose it because it is kind of like black or red, right?
The thing with investing in any asset class is there is that risk of loss in any investment, whether it's property, whether it's stocks, whether it's your mum buying gold jewelry and keeping it, in the safe at home. There's a risk of loss with all of it. And that's inherent with all types of investments. But anything that's more volatile, there's usually a greater risk of loss. So yes, you have to be comfortable with if you put money into crypto, you may not see it again. By the same token, you only experience a loss if you sell with any investment, right? Or if you're forced to sell. Like, for example, if you buy a company and it goes to zero, you're kind of forced to sell. Like, you don't get to just hold on to it like, well, it might come back. It might just be gone. Same with the crypto. If you bought a coin and the coin gets disbanded, well, you've kind of lost it. So even with crypto, if it does go down, you could always just hold it and just hope for the best. And one day it might come back. But ultimately, yes, to your point, you should be comfortable with the fact that you might lose all of that money. So again, probably inadvisable to put too much in there.
We've talked a lot about various different types of investment vehicles. If you were to advise me, what investments should I be getting involved in to diversify my portfolio and hedge the risk? Because like you said, I don't want to throw everything into crypto and then be buggered.
Yeah.
So what should I do? Where should I be playing?
So one thing I would make clear from the outset, as a financial coach, money coach, I would not be advising you on what to buy, when to buy, what to invest in. Aside from the fact that those are regulated activities and I'm not regulated to give that sort of advice, it's not my part as a coach to do that. But what I would do is make you aware of the options out there. So we've mentioned a couple: property. We mentioned a couple of others: commodities. Maybe I have a friend, and even I have a bit of a whiskey collection at home, right? These are commodities that for some people, it makes a better investment than putting their money in the stock market or in crypto. But then there's crypto as well. But to be honest, the stock market is actually probably the easiest and most accessible for most people. It wasn't always the case. The internet has helped. Yeah. Competition amongst brokerages has helped. Now you've got all these AI brokers where you can put in X amount per month, and based on some questions that you answer, they will automatically invest that for you. But when it comes to the stock market, there's these things called funds. Funds are basically a collection or a basket of underlying companies in the stock market. I say companies when they're equities, but it could be bonds, which are basically loans, which is a different type of asset class. But these companies and these bonds can span any sort of industry. So let's give an example. If you wanted to invest in property, but you're a little bit hesitant to actually go and buy a property and go through that whole conveyancing process, you could buy into what's called a REIT, which is a real estate investment trust, which is a type of fund listed on the stock market. And it owns a share of several or lots of different property companies. And there's some way associated with property. There might be property builders, there might be property development companies, there might be rental or management companies, all sorts of ancillary services related to property, but they're all in that property game. So you get a broad exposure of the whole property sector by buying this one fund, or you can go and buy that 2-bed terrace in Hounslow, and you're still in the property sector, but you're very specified on that sector in Hounslow for a 2-bed terrace. Up to you which way you want to go. There's pros and cons to both. If you grew up and lived in Hounslow, that might be the better choice for you because you know it.
Yeah.
And you can self-manage that property and you know everything's going on with it, less chance of risk for you. But for someone else who's in Manchester, they may not think the Hounslow is a low-risk investment. They prefer to go with a fund, which is self-managed. And it's potentially a lower price point because the thing with stock market investing is for a lot of the funds, you can get in for a much lower price point, like £100, £50 a month sort of thing, versus you're not going to be buying a 2-bed terrace in Hounslow for £50 a month.
I mean, if you can, let me know where I can get one. Okay, that's interesting because I have a real issue with the lack of financial education that has been provided either from like generation to generation or within schools, right? And I think growing up, everyone has, like you said, has kind of inherited like this money mindset based on their background or what their parents have kind of passed down to them unknowingly or knowingly through what they've said and things like that. How can we almost start to re-educate ourselves, but also address some of the harmful kind of habits or ways of thinking that are there within not only ourselves, but maybe our partners or maybe our family? How do we start to like spot and then call out those behaviors and then rectify or repair?
It's a good question. I don't think there's an easy answer to this, only because, again, it's emotional, right? When it comes to helping people overcome their behaviors and mindsets, I think one of the founding assumptions you make is that they want to change. For a lot of people, they don't actually want to change. Yeah. So if you come across that, it's always going to be an uphill struggle. But some of the obvious techniques you could employ are addressing it with facts. So if somebody's always living off of debt and they just don't think it's a problem, addressing them with the facts of, as being as supportive as possible, helping them to understand how much interest they're paying on that debt. And maybe a simple illustration to show that, well, if you didn't have that interest, this is what your finances could be like. And it's one of the techniques that I employ with my clients, because for a lot of people, as you mentioned, even from the surveys, one paycheck away from homelessness, and they're in this endless consumer debt cycle. And there's actually quite a common misconception that when you have debt, as an example for a credit card, and you do a 0% balance transfer, quite a surprising amount of people believe that that's zero cost to them. But they neglect the fact that there's more often than not a percentage-based fee to take out that debt in the first place. And lenders aren't dummies, right? Yeah. They've built that in. So it's more marketing than anything else. Yes, there's 0% for the 30 months you're going to be paying off that card, but you're paying 3.45% of the total amount up front. So you've paid the interest on it already, and then it's 0%, right? So it's educating people to highlight to them, because they may not even be aware, educating them that you are paying interest. This is actually detrimental to your finances. But if we were to follow this payment plan, go for a 0% zero fee card, you could be debt free by this date. And then look how much money you're saving every month. And you'll see that number going up and up and up because you're not paying interest. And these are all the things that you could be doing. And again, it comes back to that value-based spending. What do they value? They probably don't value paying interest. That's probably not high on their agenda of, I wish I'm paying interest, right? They're probably thinking, I want to be spending on these other things, which I value more. Well, you could be if you weren't paying the interest. So maybe we can have a conversation about how do we make that happen for you. But when it comes to family and behaviors, as I kind of touched on earlier, there's this going in assumption that anything we've learned as a child isn't working in our best interest anymore. But that may not be the case. The rule itself fundamentally might be quite good. It might just be how we've internalized it, how we're applying it today doesn't make as much sense. So it might just be, again, an awareness point, reflecting on, okay, that might be a good rule, like, valuing the having money and that it's not easy to come by is a good rule. But how am I implementing that? How am I living that? And does that need refinement? It's always got to start at home, I think, before we try and change others. And leading by example as well. Something I found helpful in coaching is sharing my own life examples, helping people to see what transformation I've had and what are the positive outcomes I've had of that transformation. But awareness, education. I myself went on this journey as well over 10, 15 years. Like, I come from a finance background, but I was terrible. I didn't apply any of it to my personal life. So I was not that great with personal finances. And then through, personal life changes, as life evolves, getting married and having kids, your mindset changes. And then it's about education. So I was, loading my brain with books, blogs, podcasts, talking to people and having those conversations that then build that awareness around what's out there. And you realize that there's just so much out there that you can do. And it is very specific to each individual about what you want to achieve, your time frame, your individual circumstances, and then having these conversations.
And it all comes down to choices, right? Because what I'm hearing from everything that you're saying is there's this huge pressure to show up as this individual or this person that has this perception of they're driving this car and they live in this neighborhood and they have a 6-bedroom house and their kids are X, Y, and Z and going to whatever. And I feel like there's this build-up of this pressure to become or perform in a certain way that isn't necessarily serving you and serving the values that you hold dear, whether that's cars or whether that's holidays or whether that's, what have you. And I think that's really, for me, the slap in the face moment is it comes down to your choice. We all make choices every single day, whether it's how we show up or what we spend our money on, if it's that coffee that we want to buy or if we make coffee at home and we save those £5, whatever it is. And I think those small choices that we do make amalgamate into like this bigger vision.
Yeah.
And I think that's a point that often gets missed. And I think we're in a society, again, where we're so focused on how do I get rich fast? And how can I make an extra like 10 grand this month? And there's so many things online that's like, oh, quit your job and sell this Etsy template for 5 grand a month. I guess the question I'm trying to ask is financial freedom a reality for the average Joe, or is it actually just a pipe dream?
I love this question. I would say it's really important to remember that financial freedom is not a destination.
Okay.
It's a mindset and it's a journey that's shaped by every decision you make in how you manage your money. Every single decision. So you can get into financial freedom today just by changing how you think about your money. Every decision you make around money. Should I spend on that? Should I spend on this? Should I spend less on this? Etc. As well as the income side. But I think the common understanding of financial freedom being to be able to live your life with relative freedom, not being tied down to making decisions by how much money you have or don't have. Absolutely, I'm a firm believer that it's available to everybody. But there's a lot of things in this equation that are completely under your control. Some less so, but income, right? It's up to you, for the most part, how much you can earn. Now, it doesn't have to be a PAYE job and just doing more hours. As you mentioned, Etsy templates, right? If you wanted to earn more, there are lots of things out there now with the modern economy, ways you can bring in just a little bit of extra money. If that's important to you, then you could do that. And that's within your control. What's easier to control is expenses and how much you spend on what, right? That's entirely under our control. No one's forcing us to spend any money. That's all choices and decisions. So again, back to looking at your current finances, figuring out, are you spending on the things that you want to be spending on? And if not, cut it out. So that's also within our control. But ultimately, being able to be free and having that comfortable nest egg, if you like, to be able to make the most of any other opportunities. If that's what your definition of financial freedom is, then that's going to be largely dependent on how much does your life cost today. So before, you go out and sign that new car lease for the latest Mercedes, are you doing it because you just want to be on par with your peers? Do you really care you got a Mercedes, or can you go and get a Prius and you'd be just as happy? Yeah. But you know that you're saving money for other things that you value more. So it is, back to the first point I made, reflection, self-awareness, and understanding what it is you want to achieve. Think back to that Google Maps analogy, right?
Yeah.
Where are you trying to get to? You don't open Google Maps and then look at your mate to see, well, how are they getting somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
You look at Google Maps to put in your destination and your current position, how you're going to get there, not how everybody else is going to get there. And that's why I like that analogy, because it's very personal to you. And, you might end up on the same stretch of road as your friends. Fantastic. Wave at them through the window. But ultimately, you're going to two different places, right? So I think self-reflection and value-based spending are probably the two key takeaways, I'd say, from here.
We've spoken a lot about practical steps on how we can be better with our finances, broach difficult conversations, etc. What are the sacrifices that we have to make in order to get to our goals? Because we all talk about what we should spend our money on and things like that. But I want to ask you the reverse of that. What shouldn't we be spending our money on?
What I would say is sacrifice isn't always necessary, but probably is necessary. And how much sacrifice probably comes down to what it is you're trying to achieve. So easiest to explain in a context, if you want to retire early, the earlier you want to retire, depending on where you are right now, you may have to make more sacrifices to put away enough money to be able to retire that early. So it depends on what is your goal, when do you want to achieve it by, and where are you starting from. In an ideal world, you don't have to sacrifice. You look at your value-based spending, spend where you want to spend, etc. But the reality is most people's incomes don't spread thinly across everything that you want to spend money on. So you have to sacrifice. What my suggestion would be is use that value-based spending approach to figure out which things you care not quite as much about and try and reduce there. And appreciate the fact that it might not be forever. We're not saying cut out shoe shopping forever, right? But maybe you cut it out for the next, rather than once a month, maybe it's once every 3 months for the next 3 to 5 years. And you use the extra money to build the investments. And after a point, compounding and compound interest, which is how investments grow so exponentially, that takes about 5 to 10 years to really kick into gear before you start seeing like exponential returns. So maybe it's a 5-10 year hiatus from buying shoes every month. And I'm just using an arbitrary example to get those investments going, with the knowledge that once they start rolling on and snowballing, you can start reintroducing this passion for buying shoes. Fantastic. Safe in the knowledge that your investment goals are being taken care of. So I wouldn't call it just giving up on things and sacrificing permanently. Think of it as a journey, and you may need to just cut back a little bit now, but try to reintroduce it later.
What is one question that our listeners can ask themselves to really help shift their money mindset?
I think this one's got to be going back to awareness, and it would really be asking yourself, what behaviors do I exhibit when it comes to making money decisions, buying decisions, let's say, and really being aware of those decisions. How do you feel about those decisions when you're having to make them? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel excited? And then digging a little bit deeper. Why? And you don't have to do it for every decision, but generally it's the bigger decisions, right? You're going to book that holiday, you're going to buy a car or something like that. And tracing that back to why do you feel that way, whether it's positive or negative. And it just helps to understand where you're coming from. And if I might throw one other question in there.
Yeah, go for it. We love it.
Even a question to trump that, if you wanted to start with this, is what do you want your money to do for you this coming month? And I'll tell you why that's a really good question. What do you want your money to do for you takes a focus away from you earning and spending money to your money doing something, right? So it puts the ball in the money's court. Are you using your money intentionally to bring back results for you? And again, another analogy. Imagine you're a boss of a team of people, right? What do you want your team to be working on this month? Or are you just happy to hide them, leave them in the office, and then, come back in 6 months to a year and be like, what did you make, right? Yeah. Or do you want to tell them what you want them to work on? It's a really important perception, mindset shift to think about what do I want my money to be doing? I want it to be working harder for me. Yeah. I want it to be pulling me in this direction, not in this direction. So that's probably a good question to ask yourself, and then assess, is it doing that? And if it's not, how do you get it to do that?
I love that. I love that twist on how do I make my money work for me rather than me working for my money. And it's not something that we often sit back and think about, because And yeah, I'm guilty of it. Every month I do my finances, I bloody dread it. I'm like, what have I done this month? And I'm not thinking far enough ahead. So
Yes.
I am taking all of these gems with me and going into my financial planning. It's going to really, really help. So I just want to say thank you so much, Vig.
No problem.
Sharing your wisdom and just breaking it down for us, because I think so many of these things that are just out there and readily available, like you said, like education and awareness.
Yeah.
But it's just taking the time to actually step back and absorb all of it and actually say, actually, it's not as complicated as it may seem. And it comes down to you understanding your choices, your value, what you really hold dear, and where you want to spend your money. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me. And look,
Mm.
I'm glad that podcasts like yours exist where we can have these conversations. Others can see us having these conversations. And as you say, it's not complicated, but it's emotional, right? It's emotive. So take your time with it, but try and have more conversations.
And that's exactly the premise of this podcast, isn't it? It's to make sure that we're having more bold and fearless conversations around taboo topics like money. I know it's, as Vig mentioned, it's quite an emotive and highly charged topic, let's be honest. But financial freedom is, like he said, it's a journey with no end destination, but you've just got to be conscious about the choices that you make. And I will reference Vig and his work and the freebie that he's got going on in the show notes. So make sure you check it out below. And if you haven't already, please do take a minute to like, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because it really does help grow this podcast into bigger and better channel. And it will help bring more conversations like this one to you. So as always, stay bold, stay brave and keep being fearless.